It was dusk when I first noticed the Avon perched at the edge of the cliff, his elegant wings partially extended as he looked out over the valley below. His feathers, once a vibrant blue, were now dulled by dust and wear, and his once proud posture was marred by the slight droop of his left wing. It was a sight that spoke of hardship and despair. As I approached, careful not to startle him, the Avon's head turned sharply in my direction, his golden eyes glinting in the fading light, filled with a mix of anger and resignation. "Stay back, human," he croaked, his voice a harsh whisper. "This is none of your business." I raised my hands in a placating gesture. "Hey, I'm not here to cause trouble, just wondering what you're doing out here all alone." The Avon's gaze hardened, and he looked back towards the precipice. "Isn't it obvious?" he spat, his feathers ruffling. "I'm about to take flight one last time." I edged closer, maintaining a respectful distance. "That drop looks pretty final," I remarked, trying to keep my tone light. The Avon's beak clicked shut, and he shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his throat. "Humans," he muttered, "always with your clever words." "Hey, I just call it like I see it," I said, leaning against a nearby tree, "and right now it looks like you could use a friend." The Avon's wings fluttered, and he tightened his grip on the branch he was perched on. "I don't need your pity," he replied, but there was a tremor in his voice that suggested otherwise. "Who said anything about pity?" I replied, pulling a small flask from my pocket and taking a sip. "Just figured we could enjoy the sunset together. It's a pretty good one." For a moment, there was silence. Then, with a sigh that seemed to deflate him, the Avon folded his wings and settled back on the branch. "You humans and your sunsets," he murmured, but there was less venom in his tone now. "Yeah, well, we don't have wings to take us up to better views," I joked, offering him the flask. He eyed it warily but eventually took it, sniffing the contents before taking a cautious sip. We sat there in companionable silence for a while, watching as the sky turned shades of orange and pink. The Avon's feathers seemed to glow in the twilight, and for a moment, he looked like he might take flight after all. "So," I said eventually, "what brought you to this point?" The Avon sighed again, deeper this time, and his shoulders slumped. "A fall from grace," he said quietly. "Once I was a leader among my people, but mistakes were made, trust was broken, and now I am here." I nodded, not pressing for details. "Life has a way of knocking us down sometimes," I said, "but it also has a way of giving us second chances." The Avon looked at me skeptically. "And what would a human know of second chances?" I smiled, pulling back my sleeve to reveal a series of faded scars. "More than you might think," I replied. "We've all got our battles, our falls from grace. The trick is finding the strength to stand back up." The Avon's eyes softened, and he took another sip from the flask. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "perhaps there is still a reason to keep fighting." "Always," I said, reaching out to place a hand on his shoulder. "Always a reason." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the valley. As darkness fell, the Avon and I sat in silence, the weight of our shared burdens lifted, if only for a moment. When the last light had faded, he looked at me and nodded. "Thank you, human," he said, his voice steadier now, "for being here." I nodded back, offering a small smile. "Anytime," I said. "Let's get you back to solid ground." Together, we walked away from the edge, the Avon steps growing surer with each passing moment. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like there might be a way forward. And in the quiet of the night, under a canopy of stars, we found a small measure of hope. As we walked back from the edge of the cliff, the quiet night around us felt almost serene, punctuated only by the distant hum of the forest and the occasional call of nocturnal creatures. The Avon walked with a noticeable limp, his left wing dragging slightly against the ground. "You should see a healer about that wing," I suggested, breaking the silence. "Flying with it must be painful." The Avon glanced at his wing and sighed. "It is, but healers cost money, and money, well, I have none." "Maybe I can help with that," I offered. "I know a few people in town who might owe me a favor or two. They could patch you up." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of suspicion and hope. "Why would you do that for me?" I shrugged. Everyone deserves a second chance. Besides, I'd rather help you get back on your feet, or wings, than see you fall off another cliff. A small smile played on the edges of his beak. You're a strange human. I get that a lot, I admitted, smiling back. Come on, let's get you somewhere safe for the night. I know a place. We walked in silence for a while longer until we reached a small dilapidated cabin nestled at the edge of the forest. It wasn't much, but it was a shelter and a place where he could rest. I opened the creaky door and motioned for him to enter. It's not the Ritz, but it's dry and relatively warm, I said. Make yourself at home. The Avon hesitated at the threshold, then stepped inside, looking around the simple interior. This is your home? Nah, just a place I crash when I'm out this way, I replied, lighting a small lantern that cast a warm glow around the room. The owner's an old friend. He's usually not around, but he won't mind us staying here. The Avon settled onto a makeshift bed in the corner, carefully folding his injured wing. Thank you, he said softly, his eyes reflecting the lantern's light. I didn't expect this kind of kindness. I nodded and pulled up a chair. Everyone has their dark days. Sometimes all it takes is a little light to find the way out. We sat there for a while, talking about life, our pasts, and the choices that had led us to this moment. The Avon shared stories of his people, of the pride and honor they once held, and the mistakes that had brought him low. I listened, offering my own tales of struggle and survival. As the night wore on, the Avon's eyelids grew heavy, and he finally succumbed to sleep. I watched over him for a while, making sure he was comfortable, then settled into a chair to rest myself. The next morning, I was awakened by the sound of soft rustling. The Avon was already up, standing by the window and looking out at the dawn light filtering through the trees. Morning, I greeted, stretching. How are you feeling? Better, he replied, turning to face me. Still sore, but better. Thank you. I stood up and grabbed my coat. Come on, let's get you to that healer. With any luck, we can get you back in the air soon. We made our way to the nearby town, where an old friend of mine, a healer named Maris, ran a small clinic. Maris was a no-nonsense kind of person, but she had a heart of gold and a knack for fixing up all sorts of injuries. When we arrived, Maris raised an eyebrow at the sight of the Avon but didn't hesitate. Bring him in, she said, ushering us into her clinic. Let's see what we're dealing with. The Avon looked nervous, but I gave him an encouraging nod. You're in good hands, I assured him. Maris worked quickly, examining the Avon's wing with practiced hands. You're lucky, she said after a thorough inspection. It's not broken, just badly strained. With some rest and proper care, you'll be flying again in no time. Relief washed over the Avon's face. Thank you, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. Maris nodded and turned to me. You've got a good heart bringing him here, she said softly. He'll need a place to stay while he heals. I smiled. I think we can manage that. Over the next few weeks, the Avon stayed at the cabin, and with Maris's help, his wing slowly regained its strength. During that time, we became friends, sharing more stories and laughter. The Avon's spirit seemed to lift with each passing day, his eyes brighter and his demeanor more hopeful. One crisp morning, as the first hints of winter touched the air, the Avon stood at the edge of the clearing, his wings fully extended. He looked back at me, a mix of excitement and nerves in his gaze. Ready to give it a try? I asked. He nodded, taking a deep breath. Yes. Thank you, my friend, for everything. With a powerful beat of his wings, he launched into the air, soaring higher and higher until he was just a speck against the clear blue sky. I watched.